Cantwell Cliffs is a tourist trap. The winter is slightly better and snowy days even more so. That's when I always try to go. I live nearby and I've had enough of the summer crowds for one lifetime. My friend Sarah had never been before, so we decided to go this past Valentine's Day, since we both had the day off and would otherwise be spending the holiday alone. When the forecast turned from flurries to snow to a possible weather emergency, we thought about canceling our trip. But we had ice cleats, and she drove a Jeep, so we thought, what the hell? We'd been planning the trip for weeks, and we weren't going to let a little snow ruin it. When we got there, it didn't disappoint. The parking lot was completely empty, a sight I didn't think I'd ever see. 2 in the afternoon, and not only was there not a car in sight, but there weren't even any tire tracks. Granted, the snow was still falling and about to turn dangerous in a few hours, so maybe we shouldn't have been out there either. But damn, it was beautiful. Sarah, I told her, you could come here 100 more times and you might never see it empty like this again. We started walking, and even despite what happened that day, I'd never seen it look so lovely. The snow had stuck to every branch of every tree. There were lots of pine trees, which gave the forest a ton of green even in the midst of winter. If I didn't know we were in the Midwest, just by looking at it, I would have guessed Alaska or Canada, somewhere much farther north. The start of the trail can be hard to spot, even with the markers. It was at the edge of a cliff and began at a steep staircase that ran through a crevice in the rock. There were a few old, snowed-over footprints approaching the edge of the staircase, and even one on the top stair, but whoever had approached the steps had quickly decided it was not the right kind of weather to be hiking in. "You sure you're up for this?" I asked her. "Heck yeah," she said. "This is nothing. Easy peasy." Even with our ice cleats, it was tough. The ice and snow had frozen on the already weathered, shallow steps, so it was basically just a ramp to the bottom. Without the spikes on our shoes, we wouldn't have been able to do it. Sarah fell near the bottom and slid about 5 feet before she could catch her footing again. "Easy peasy, huh?" I asked her, and she just brushed the snow off her pants and smiled. That did make me rethink the hike, and I almost suggested turning back. But we were here, and we'd already done the toughest part of the trail, so why not keep going? We started out walking under the cliffs, past a few waterfalls. Most of the falls down here just trickle unless the rain is heavy, but in the winter the ice freezes over itself in thick sheets, creating the illusion of a roaring, formidable waterfall. Sometimes the ice connects with the ground, sometimes it just hangs in perilous stalactites with a pillar of bubbled blue ice at the bottom. I snapped a few pictures with my camera, some of the only ones I'd taken down here without people in them. "You think it's too icy for the rim trail?" Sarah asked me. "I mean, the trail's technically one way, so we kind of have to do it, right?" I responded. "Don't worry, the path doesn't go too close to the cliffs. If you think it's safe, I'm game," she replied. Sarah wasn't from the Midwest, so she didn't know the area as well. When we first started hiking, I'd have to reassure her that we didn't need bear mace or rattlesnake boots. And yes, 1 bottle of water would be plenty. There really weren't any dangers in our part of the wilderness, apart from the occasional homeless camp. She'd sometimes ask about urban legends too, if she should bring her EVP or if we ever saw Bigfoot out here, and I'd tell her I didn't believe in that stuff, until we were hiking a bit too close to sunset or heard an animal scream I didn't recognize. Then, sometimes, I believed in that stuff a little bit. Anyway, we took some slippery steps up to the trail and started climbing elevation a bit, rising near the top of the tree line that we'd just been underneath. I'd done the trail countless times over the years, and it always seemed higher up in the winter. The naked branches made it easier to see down off the sides of the cliffs, though we didn't venture too close to the edges. There was a small, open-faced cabin overlooking one of the cliffs, and we sat for a minute, reading the graffiti and eating granola bars. It was mostly initials carved into hearts. We found one that said T+S, and I joked with her that it was a sign we were both playing for the wrong team. We were just putting our water back in our bags when we heard it, a very faint help coming from somewhere ahead of us. I was almost thinking I had imagined it, but it repeated louder, help, followed by hello, again coming from ahead of us, coming from down the cliff. We looked at each other with wide eyes and walked closer, stopping a few feet from the edge. You didn't want to get too close in the winter. It was impossible to tell what was rock and what was snow, ready to fall and take you with it. Hello? Sarah said. Hello, the voice answered back. Help me, please. Help me. I got this, I told her. I grabbed a stick, got down on my stomach, crawled forward, and poked the snow ahead of me to make sure there was still solid ground. Eventually, I could peer over the edge. There was a man down at the bottom of the cliff, and when I saw him, I knew in a quick, harsh way that he was not okay. His arms and legs were twisted up, and he was sprawled out on the ground. No blood that I could see, but that didn't mean much. He was wearing a light green coat and pants that looked torn and dirty. I gasped when I saw him, but steadied my voice and yelled, "Don't worry, we'll go get help." "Please wait," he cried. "Don't leave me alone." I glanced back at Sarah, who said, "I can go." She was definitely more in shape than me. She was a runner. In a pinch, she'd get back faster. "All right. You might get reception on the way back. Turn your phone on loud. It'll blow up with emails and stuff when you hit reception." She nodded. "If I don't get it on the trail, I'll get it driving out of here, maybe on the first hill." She swung her pack over her shoulder and said, "I'll be fast." "All right, go," I said, and she was worried. I yelled down, "I'm still here." The wind had died down during my brief conversation with Sarah, and I could hear much more clearly when he replied, "Thank God. Look, my friend's going to get help," I told him. Then, even though I didn't believe it, I said, "You're going to be okay." I reached under my stomach and moved a few sticks out of the way, settling into the cold snow. When I peered over the edge again, I got a better look at him. His arm was folded over, and it looked too short, like it had snapped before his elbow and folded over twice, just in a horrible bundle. His other arm was tucked under him, and his legs looked off. Neither of them were bending the right way. But he was talking. That was a good sign. My eyes wandered to the snow around him. It looked disturbed, like he'd tried to drag himself around. "What's your name?" he asked. "It's Tim," I told him. "What's yours?" I pulled my hat down a bit. The cold was getting to me now that I wasn't moving around. "Tim," he echoed, ignoring my question. Then he asked, "Are you alone up there, Tim?" "Yeah," I responded. "My friend went to go get help." I tried to sound reassuring, he said, then quieter, "That's very good." "How long have you been down there?" I asked him. "Oh, a long time," he said. And I thought, yeah, no, he must have been there at least a day. There hadn't been any other tire tracks in the lot. And then I thought, wait a second, where was his car? "I've been down here so long, Tim," he said, interrupting my thoughts. I wiggled closer to the ground, trying to get lower to avoid the sudden rush of wind that was back in the forest. I knew it was just the cold, but when he said my name, the way he said my name, it made me feel even colder. I immediately felt bad for that thought. He was clearly delirious, but nonetheless, something about him was unsettling. "And I've been so alone down here," he crooned. There was something else bothering me. Why hadn't we seen any footprints going down those stairs at the start of the trail? "Well, don't worry," I said, peering back over the edge again. "You're not alone anymore." "No," he said, shuffling slightly. "I'm not." I was about to tell him not to move around when my eyes locked on the snow around him. The way it was disturbed, it wasn't like he'd been crawling. There were footprints leading up to his body and coming from deep into the forest. And with that, he sat up. My eyes widened with the awful but confusing realization. He hadn't fallen. He'd walked there. And I lay there for a second, trying to make sense of things. He must have been trying to distract me for some reason. I thought about those stories you hear. People on the side of the road with a baby or a broken down car who flag you down only to distract you long enough for the rest of their crew to come out of the woods or block you in. I looked behind me, certain someone would be closing in, but there wasn't anyone there. I looked back again, one more time, ready to stand up and run, but what I saw froze me in place. He was standing up, but he was standing up on legs that were still backward, the knees bending out behind him. And then his arms unfurled. The bends I'd interpreted as broken bones were just a ruse to disguise how long his arms were. They just kept getting longer as they straightened out. And at the ends, his hands that had been covered by snow were now visible. Fingers incredibly long, with black points at the end that I could only assume were claws. And then he walked up closer to the cliff, and I lost sight of him. It was concave at the bottom. I heard an awful scraping sound. And in just seconds, I saw his head peer around a ledge higher up the cliff. "Peekaboo," he said in a sing-song voice. He was climbing up the side of the cliff. I got up and ran as fast as I could on the snow and ice. It felt like trying to run in a dream, my feet sticking and slipping with every step, and I was going so slow. Even under the best conditions, I couldn't have outrun him. Even the wind was working against me. It must have been at least 20 miles an hour, pushing me back toward that terrible drop-off. I heard crunching in the snow behind me, and I knew he'd cleared the cliff. I ran a few more steps, and then I slipped on the ice, like some idiot in a horror movie. Before I could get up, I felt claws on my back. I didn't think my heart could beat any faster, but it went into overdrive as he said, "Caught you, Tim." He dragged me back with ease. I kicked and yelled and fought for my life, but it didn't faze him. This creature, whatever it was, his claws were digging into my sides, and every kick and punch I landed drove them in deeper. But I didn't stop. He dragged me past the cabin, and I tried to grab it. As we got closer to the edge of the cliff, I dug my fingers into the ice. But it did nothing. The creature threw me over its shoulder as it prepared to descend, my feet up in the air. I grabbed a small tree growing on the side of the cliff and put all my strength into just holding on. "Oh, come on now, Tim. I won't drop ya," he said, pulling me. And I looked at him, really looked at his face for the first time. It looked human, but it was so pale. His eyes were an icy blue, almost white. His arms were so cold, deathly cold, and his clothes, they were too small. His jacket had little blue flowers embroidered on it. There were holes on the side and down the front, like it had been ripped off. I kicked madly at the ice above us, keeping a death grip on the tree. By luck, or maybe divine intervention if you believe in that sort of thing, the ice cracked. The creature looked up, what could possibly be surprise on its dead face, and fell. It let go of me, instinctively putting its arms up with those terrible claws to protect itself. I held onto the tree for dear life as the ice slid away, just inches from taking the small tree with it. Blue stalactites of ice taller than me fell with the creature, and I found myself hoping they would fall on top of it, impaling its horrible body. I clambered up the edge of the cliff with an agility I didn't know I possessed, and I ran. It was painfully slow, but the wind had died down a bit. I didn't hear anything behind me, but I didn't slow down. After 5, maybe 10 minutes of running on the ice, I found Sarah. She was limping along, trying to get up a staircase. "Sarah!" I said. She looked back, a slightly embarrassed look on her face. I gathered she must have been walking too fast and had messed up her ankle. I caught up to her and told her, "We need to get out of here. Now." What about that guy?" she asked. He said he didn't want to be left alone. Then a dark look passed over her face, and she asked, he's not dead?" I paused. "At least I don't think so. I'll tell you about it in the car. We need to go." I thought about telling her the truth. I did, but this was slowing us down, and I needed her to have more of a sense of urgency. So I told her something more plausible, what I first thought was happening when I saw those footprints. "He wasn't hurt, Sarah. It was some kind of distraction. He didn't fall. He walked there. I think there might be more people in the woods. I think he was trying to keep us here for something." She got the picture then. We got out of there as fast as we could. With her ankle, I practically had to push her up the last set of stairs. I don't know how it didn't catch up to us. I figured it must have been dead, or at least hurt. We made it out, and I got behind the wheel. The snow was falling again, and the drive was tense. I'd never driven Sarah's car, and the roads were windy and icy. We came dangerously close to running off the road twice, but I wasn't afraid of getting into a car wreck. No, I was afraid of what would find us if we ended up stranded by the side of the road. I took Sarah to the hospital and I told her I'd filed the police report while she was in there. I wish I could have done something, told someone. But who the hell do you tell about something like that? Something impossible? I spent a long time Googling the history of that area, any creatures or ghosts or anything similar to what I saw. But there was nothing. I looked at previous deaths, wondering if there had been a man who'd fallen from the cliffs and matched his description. But I didn't find anything. But then again, in the wilderness, you can never be sure. Scavengers could have moved his body, but I don't know if that thing was a ghost. What kind of ghost can climb up a wall and grab people? I was going to let it go, move on with my life as usual, just without ever going hiking again. But then I saw the news later that week. Someone had died at Cantwell Cliffs. They'd fallen from the tops of one of the cliffs, and worse still, they'd been out the same day as us. The story had popped up on my phone while I was looking at it before bed, and when I saw the title, I turned on my lights and went to double-check that the door was in fact locked. A girl had been out hiking during the snowstorm just an hour or so after we'd left. She was an experienced hiker. She'd been mountain climbing and exploring in areas much more dangerous than here. Her family was baffled at how she would have fallen. Then I got down to her injuries. Her right arm was broken in multiple places, and her legs had both snapped backward, which, yes, I know could have just been a coincidence, but it gets worse. She was wearing a green coat that none of her family remembered her owning. There wasn't a picture, but they described it as being distinctive, as it had blue flowers embroidered into it. She had puncture wounds on her side, and her injuries were so extensive that the autopsy had initially been released in case there had been foul play involved. But no, the coroner had ruled she must have fallen. And the cause of death was actually hypothermia. The article ended with her brother talking about how horrible it was. She must have been down there for hours before succumbing to the cold, he'd said. I just can't stop thinking about her being out there alone for so long. But he's wrong. I don't think she was alone. I think she had the company of that horrible creature as she lay dying in the snow. I vividly remembered his voice, chiding, "I won't drop you." And I found myself wondering if she'd fallen or if he'd taken her down the cliff and broken her bones himself. They took down the article a little while later after they determined there wasn't foul play. Her family didn't want the graphic autopsy report out there anymore. Local news like that can be hard to find, and if I hadn't seen it in that week, I might never have. It made me wonder how many other deaths had happened there that just aren't reported online. I wondered how many others had those same injuries. Eventually, I came up with a theory. The creature was feeling well enough to snatch another person just after me and Sarah left. It should have been able to come after us. We were going so slow. And there are no legends. No sightings, nothing of this thing. If it lives there or haunts there, or however it exists, there should be something. I wonder if maybe it only frequents the trail when the crowds are gone, when lone hikers can be found on the trail. Perhaps it only hunts prey that's alone, like it kept saying it didn't want to be. And I guess for a few hours it had the company of a dying girl. It wasn't alone, and neither was she. Linda and I had been park rangers for over a decade. My story is rather unusual, and you may believe it or not. It started with the missing hikers. At first, I thought they had simply gotten lost or wandered off the trail, but as more and more people went missing, I began to realize that something sinister was at play. Then there were the eerie noises at night, growls and snarls that sent shivers down my spine. I knew I had to investigate. I spent countless hours going through the woods, searching for any signs of the missing hikers or the source of the noises. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find anything. And then one night, it happened. I was walking back to my cabin after a long day of searching when I heard a rustling in the bushes. I reached for my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the noise, but all I could see were two glowing eyes staring back at me. Before I had a chance to react, the creature lunged at me. It was massive, easily 3,000 pounds, and had 5 legs instead of the usual 4. Its fur was matted, and its teeth were bared. I knew in that moment that I was in serious danger. I reached for my gun and fired a shot, hitting the creature in the shoulder. It let out a deafening roar and retreated back into the woods. I was shaken but relieved that I had survived the attack. Over the next few days, I searched the woods for any sign of the creature, but there was nothing. No tracks, no fur, nothing to indicate that it had ever been there. It was as if the creature had vanished into thin air. From that point on, I was on high alert. I never ventured into the woods alone and always carried my gun with me. But no matter how much I prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching and waiting. Days passed without any sign of the creature, and I began to let my guard down. I thought that perhaps I had scared it off for good, but then one day I received a strange signal from deep in the woods. It was from a hiker who had gone missing. I knew what I had to do. I gathered a team of search and rescue experts, and we set out into the woods to find the missing hiker. As we searched, we had a feeling that this unknown predator was somewhere near. And then, just as we were about to give up hope, we found him, the missing hiker, alive and well. He told us that he had been wandering through the woods when he heard a rustling in the bushes, and then out of nowhere, the creature had appeared, staring at him with those glowing eyes. But this time, it just growled and went back into the woods. As we made our way back to civilization, I couldn't help but feel relieved that we had found the hiker alive. But I also knew that the creature was still out there. We'd been up on Hooper Bald Trailhead with the intent of stargazing. However, it was unusually warm for the end of October 2019. Thick fog rolled in around 9 p.m., and we eventually gave up around 11 p.m. We sat and talked to an older couple who had pulled off to spend the night due to the fog, and we eventually left at maybe 1 a.m. from the Hooper Bald Overlook parking area. We made our way back down slowly until the scenic overlook at Chute Cove. By the time we got there at maybe 1:30 a.m., the fog and most of the clouds had subsided. There is a small parking lot at this overlook that holds maybe 7 cars and a field the size of a soccer pitch separating you from the tree line with some picnic tables dotted around. We pulled up, got out of the car, turned it off along with the lights, and set up our tripods, cameras, and lenses to take some photos of the stars and try to catch some of the Milky Way if possible on long exposure. We were about 15 to 20 photos in, each exposure being about 30 seconds or so. In this time, no cars passed, no owls hooted, no foxes screamed, only the faint sounds of some bugs and the occasional bat fluttering about. Later on, it was eventually deathly quiet. No sounds, not bugs chirping, nor bats fluttering around, not even leaves rustling in the wind. It was eerie, to say the least. I got the feeling a little uneasy. I can't pinpoint why, but I was getting that fluttery feeling in my chest. We kept taking pictures for a few minutes longer. But as time went on, we could hear some things going on in the woods, namely, what I could best describe as either stones being tossed or shuffling in the tree line. I ignored this for maybe 5 minutes or so. To me, it sounded like it was at our 10 and 2 o'clock positions relative to where we were. There was also an occasional wood-on-wood sound, but not like a branch falling. It was repetitive and slow and only one hit, unlike a branch that would hit a lot on its way down. After what sounded like a branch snapping to our 9 or 10 o'clock, my fiancé just said, "Did you hear that?" I said quietly, "Yes." "Was that the first one you heard?" And they responded back, "No, we need to leave." We had both been scanning the tree line, but were unable to see any direct movement. It spooked us both so badly, we packed up the cameras and walked backwards to the car, never turning our backs to the direction of the sounds. We opened the doors, tossed our gear into the back seat, got in, and locked the doors, basically as soon as we reached the car. We sat in it for about 2 or 3 minutes after cranking it up and turning on the lights, but never saw anything. I am a fairly avid hiker and primitive or semi-primitive camper, and have run across deer, bear, and even the occasional wild dog or coyote, but nothing has ever just given me the willies before. It was uncanny and unnerving. My fiancé said it was like they just had the primal urge to run, like we were being hunted or stalked. I had the same feeling, like something was there, or a small group of somethings, and they were closing in. By the time we got in the car, I felt like we were prey. We never saw anything, no animal, no creature, no glint of eyes in the tree line. I would like to think we didn't just get scared over nothing, but who knows? Late at night, where we can't see or hear well, our minds can play tricks on us. I've chatted with them before posting this to make sure I recalled it the same way. We had not spoken of it since that trip, but we both have the same impression of the encounter. We both feel like there were at least 2 things starting to flank us, and that we were prey, in my words, or hunted, in theirs. I'm not really sure if there is any local lore or creatures of the woods in this area from native tales that would fit this. I am insanely skeptical on all matters of cryptids, but this was just bizarre. Bears don't really do much in groups. Wild canines like wolves and coyotes don't usually flank humans, and I doubt any normal group animal would cross an open field without any cover. I want to explain and counter with something logical, but I'm not quite sure what it was. I had gotten into an argument with my mom about the hat man that was leaning over me while I slept on the couch, something my sister informed me of the following day. A lot of weird stuff happened at that house, but that wasn't the encounter. No, it was after the argument. I was walking out of the house, down the road. We were surrounded by woods, and a small swamp was behind our place. I was walking down the road, which was wooded on both sides. Not many people came down where we were, so I was listening to music on my walk, and I felt like something was watching me. I lived in Alabama, so it was weird. Nobody came into our woods, not ever. I looked over, and there I saw it. He was hunched over and huge. He had pale features and was so skinny, I could see its rib cage. The thing that threw me off was its mask-like face. It didn't wear a mask, but its face had mask-like features. The only reason I say its face wasn't wearing a mask was because I could see its mouth perfectly. It had dark eyes. I thought it had eye bags, but maybe I was just trying to reassure myself. I heard a branch crunch under its hand, or at least I like to assure myself it was its hand. It reminded me of a human, but all wrong. Please, someone tell me they've got some explanation because I can't. Thank you. I was 4 years old. I have experienced paranormal events my entire life, sightings, dreams, and premonitions. This is one of my first experiences that I have memory of. We lived in a cedar-sided, split-floor home on top of a mountain. I had a younger brother, about 10 months old. We shared a bedroom across the hall from my parents' room. We would see this figure constantly. We saw it so much that we started to just ignore it. It stood about 3 or 4 feet tall, had an outline like a teddy bear, and wore a classic Viking helmet with horns. But we never could see its features, just the dark shadow. Our older cousin, 1 or 2 years older, spent the night one night. Everyone was in a circle with our sleeping bags on the floor of our room. The lights were still on. My cousin immediately whispered, "What is that?" and pointed at the creature standing in our doorway, watching us. I told him it was just our monster, and he watches us play. He can't do anything to us or hurt us. I stuck my tongue out at it to assure my cousin the thing was harmless. My mom had told us monsters couldn't get us, so I was extra brave around it. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I slept on the top bunk and my brother on the bottom. I saw the creature climbing up the bunk bed ladder to my bed. To this day, I have no idea why or how I was brave enough to do this, but I moved to the ladder and sat in front of it, blocking the creature from coming up. It stopped climbing, but we were inches from each other's faces. It seemed like we sat like that forever, because I remember thinking, what the heck is this, and why can't I see its actual face? I reached out and tapped its shoulder. All hell broke loose as soon as I touched it. I could see all of it. The entire body was covered in monster heads. Its main face had giant eyes and sharp, sharp teeth. It was terrified of me, confused, and seemed to be in intense pain from my touch. It grabbed me by the back and tore my back up, screamed in my face. Of course, I was screaming hysterically. I broke free and crawled to the far end of my bed, started praying, and stopped screaming. By this time, my mom ran in, and all I could say was, "Monster." The next morning, my mom casually made me come into the kitchen to show her best friend my back. As an adult, my mom told me she was so scared that my back was all scratched up. Scratches I didn't have that night at bedtime. I asked my cousin what he saw that night. He admitted to it 30-plus years later and told me when I stuck my tongue out, he was terrified. As an adult, my brother described the exact same appearance of it after having a summer encounter shortly after mine. He passed it on our basement stairs, and it screamed at him. After my encounter, I never saw it again. My son, who is 3, is terrified of shadows, and he knows the difference between normal shadows. He tells me one walks around in his room. Is it the same thing? What the hell is it? While I was cutting cross-country along the Maxwell Book Trail to some reprieve above my camp, I found 2 impressions in a dung pile unlike any I've seen before. The prints were about a quarter-mile apart, but on the same ridge and identical in size, both having a prominent big toe impression. The dung pile was 12 to 14 inches in length and as big around as a 50-cent piece. I also had a visitor outside my tent at 4 a.m. I was awake and drinking coffee in my dimly lit tent. I keep the gas lantern down low to cut down noise and listen for bugling elk, so I should have heard any animal approach. But I heard nothing until a sliding, scraping sound followed by a loud thud like a person sliding at a log or a stump just a few feet outside the tent. I listened for the critter to leave, but I heard no sound. It concerned me that nothing ran away, so I grabbed an axe, went outside, and yelled, but still no movement. It was big. The thud it made was louder than I could make stomping on the ground. I forgot to mention that right before the sound, I heard a low growl that made me look down at my stomach and wonder why I didn't feel my stomach growling. It was low and long. I thought it was me at first. I bought a cottage on Mattagami Lake in June 2000. Mattagami Lake is located approximately 90 kilometers south of Timmins, Ontario, off Highway 144 towards Sudbury. It's a water access cottage, and all the lots in our area are in the 1.5-acre range. We've spent every summer there since. I also grew up spending all my summers at our family cottage since the age of 5, so I'm no stranger to being surrounded by forest. I'm very familiar with the sounds of nature and wildlife in the area. As kids, we used to wander off onto the odd logging roads behind the cottage in the middle of the night. No flashlights, no care in the world. We never came across anything remotely scary, strange, or unexplained. Anyway, back to adulthood. One night about 10 years ago, my wife and I were at the cottage on an early spring weekend. I believe it was either late April or early May. The only other people around that weekend were our neighbors, 2 doors down on one side, and my wife's parents, 3 doors down on the other. I know our neighbors well. They're in their 70s and never wander outside after dark, nor do my wife's parents. It was about 9:15 p.m. and getting dark fairly fast. My wife and I were sitting by the fire behind the cottage, facing the woods. The forest behind the cottage stretches for many miles. My wife decided to go to bed, and after she went inside, I sat quietly, staring at the fire, when I heard what sounded like 3 whacks in the distance behind the cottage. I couldn't gauge the distance, but I guessed it might have been between half a kilometer to a kilometer straight back, based on the trailing echo. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Another 10 to 15 minutes went by, then I heard it again. Same 3 whacks, but closer, louder, with less echo. I thought maybe a moose was hitting its antlers against a tree, but at that time of year, they don't have antlers. Besides, the 3 consistent whacks seemed too well-timed and way too loud. I sat there trying to figure it out. Another 15 minutes later, I heard the same 3 whacks, this time really close, maybe within a few hundred feet. I immediately stood up. It made no sense. The bush is thick back there, and by now it was pitch black. No lights. I stood there with only a pen-sized LED flashlight. I considered getting the axe from the garage, but I didn't want to leave the cottage. I quietly walked along the deck to the front of the cottage, stopped to listen, then went back toward the back. As I stood there listening, the 3 whacks came again, this time probably less than 100 feet away, right at the tree line behind the fire pit. I immediately ran to the front of the cottage, went in and locked the door. I went to the back bedroom and peeked out at the fire pit. I expected to see someone or something, but there was nothing. I didn't hear anything else. It took me hours to fall asleep. My heart was racing. A few years later, something else happened, but I wasn't alone this time. At least 10 of us were out there when we heard a blood-curdling scream from a few hundred yards away. Everyone stopped talking and looked at each other. Soon after, the same type of scream came from deep in the forest, as if answering the first one. I scoured the internet and listened to all kinds of animal sounds and screams. Nothing comes close. Was it Bigfoot? We've never seen anything resembling one, but I believe that's what we have around us. I was driving home on an isolated road through a mountainous area in Tilda County, Pennsylvania. It was late and I was exhausted. I was drifting in and out of a daydream state. You know how it is when you're tired and pushing on. The caffeine wasn't helping, and I was too cheap to get a hotel. Then as I approached a curve, my headlights lit up something that looked like a person, but almost double or triple in size. I swerved to avoid it and snapped out of my daze immediately. I wasn't sure if I clipped it, but my car slid into a ditch. I got out to check if I'd hit someone, but there was no one. I was certain I saw something. The car was stuck. I sat in it, thinking I saw movement. Then the driver's side window was suddenly blocked by the drenched, furry body of something large, on 2 legs, but definitely not human. It peered in the window. Ugly, evil-looking, long, wolf-like snout, yellow fangs, and eyes that glowed unnaturally. It scratched the window with a long claw, grinning, as if it knew I couldn't run. Then another one appeared, and another. I don't know how many. I was frozen in fear. Then, in an instant, they were gone. I didn't understand why, until a pickup truck pulled up behind me. An old man stepped out, asked if I was okay, and pulled me out of the ditch. I told him what I saw. He got a strange look, like he'd heard it before, but wouldn't say more. That was in November 2020. I'll never forget it. I can only imagine what may have happened to me if that old man had not come to my rescue. This was back in 66 or 67, not sure. I was between 17 and 18 years old. 3 friends and I stayed the night out in the desert of Adelanto, California. One of them lived in a trailer in the middle of nowhere, which was fine because we were partying. Something happened during the kickback, and I got mad, stormed outside, and walked for a good 5 minutes. All of a sudden, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was confused by this unintentional reaction to God only knows what. I stopped walking. All the wildlife stopped with me. No more crickets, no owls, dead silence. I looked straight ahead to my left and saw a figure about 6 feet tall or more moving between 2 large cacti. I immediately booked it. I ran as fast as I could, knowing something was chasing me. I ran inside the trailer and slammed the door, screaming bloody murder, frantically trying to tell my friends what had just happened. They all started laughing, thinking I was nuts. But then, out of nowhere, you could hear a scraping sound running alongside the trailer, like claws on metal. Everyone froze, and we spent the rest of the night guarding all the doors and windows. After that night, it was never spoken of again. Has anyone experienced anything like this? My father worked at NASA's Johnson Space Center. As a teenager growing up in the suburbs of Houston, Texas, I was also able to make my way into the great outdoors. I was a Boy Scout, and we would take numerous camping trips throughout Texas, the hill country and the piney woods. My mother's parents owned a ranch in northeast Texas, and it was a frequent family destination for holidays and sometimes just for a vacation. I learned how to fish, hunt, pitch a tent, and basic survival skills at an early age. I would often take treks into the woods by myself without a care in the world. Thinking back on certain events that happened back then, I now view them differently, mostly because of what I'm about to tell you. It was a later experience in the Ozark National Forest at night, and it has profoundly changed the way I look at life. I moved to Northwest Arkansas in 2005. My brother and mother had already moved to Ria's Mill, Arkansas. I would frequently fish at Lake Lincoln. I would often park my truck a short walking distance from the dam and then walk up and fish from the dam bank. During one visit, I began to work my way off the dam and into some thick brush and trees to get to a large boulder protruding over the lake's bank. As I approached the tree line, I began to have an eerie feeling. It came over me out of nowhere. Now, I've been in the woods alone many times before and never felt this sensation. I quickly grabbed my rod and reel along with my tackle box and made it back to my truck. I have not been back to Lake Lincoln since. A year later, around 2007, I had moved about 40 minutes from my mother's place. I had just gone into business for myself. I was single and lived alone. I would often get bored and take drives through the mountains, sometimes even at night. One late night, I decided I needed to get out for a long ride. I was going to head to my mother's place. I started down the freeway and then exited onto Highway 16. I continued down Highway 16 for about 20 miles, then turned left onto County Road 33. It was another 10 miles or so before turning off to get to my mother's home. I crossed the Illinois River Bridge and made a sharp curve to the left. It went up a steep hill and then entered the Ozark National Forest. It was dark, only my headlights lighting the way. At the time, there was no cell service. I was smack dab in the middle of nowhere. I reached Wellington late. As I began to climb the next hill, I remembered a small pull-off lookout to my left. I needed to relieve myself. I pulled my truck over, crossed the oncoming lane, and parked on the lookout shoulder. I left the motor running with the headlights on. I stepped out, leaving the truck door open, and began to relieve myself. To the right of me was somewhat of a cliff. I could see a small pond on the opposite side of the lake, which was to my left. I found myself fixated on that ridgetop. Then I had this overwhelming feeling come over me. The hairs on the back of my neck began to stand up and goosebumps ran down my arms. There was a strong sense that someone or something was watching me. I was standing outside a lit-up truck in the middle of nowhere. I was a sitting duck. I quickly finished, jumped into my truck, threw it into drive, and squealed my wheels up the hill. Some years later, I married and became a father. My family and I went hiking through the same lake area, but on the other side. There was a rock-covered enclosure that Parks and Recreation had built some years back. While there, those same eerie feelings came back. Something wasn't right. I kept it to myself, and we finished our day of fun. A short time later, I found myself researching Bigfoot sightings in Arkansas. A significant sighting had been documented in that same area just prior to my roadside event. I also read of a sighting of a red-headed Bigfoot digging in the sand underneath a bridge along the Illinois River. I found out the sightings had been documented all over this area, dating back many years. Then I began to think of my childhood and things began to add up, like the time my grandmother told my brother and me not to venture back into certain parts of the wooded area. Or the times Grandpa's bird dogs would go into a barking frenzy in the middle of the night, and he would step outside, shooting a shotgun into the air. I can't venture into the woods much anymore, certainly not alone, and certainly not at night. I'm a Bigfoot believer. I truly feel that my overwhelming, strange feelings were the result of a Bigfoot either watching me or being in the area. As a park ranger, I've always loved exploring the wilderness, and I've seen some strange things over the years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I found deep in the heart of the park. It was a hot summer day, and I was on patrol, making my way through a dense thicket of trees when I stumbled upon a small town. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. At first, I thought I had stumbled upon some sort of movie set. The buildings were small and rustic, made of weathered wood, and surrounded by gardens filled with herbs and vegetables. The people who lived there were Native Americans, and they all seemed busy with their daily tasks. They stopped and looked at me as if they were surprised to see me. As I approached, I was greeted by a man who introduced himself as the leader of the community. He explained that they had been living there for generations, in harmony with nature and with each other. They had no interest in the outside world and preferred to keep to themselves. I was fascinated by their way of life and spent the next few hours talking to the locals and learning about their customs and traditions. But as the sun began to set, they started to warn me about something I had never heard of before: the Wendigo. They told me the Wendigo was a dangerous creature that roamed the deep woods, preying on anyone foolish enough to venture into its territory. They warned me to stay away from the woods at night and always be on the lookout for any signs of the creature. I didn't believe them, of course. I'd seen my fair share of dangerous animals in the park, but I had never heard of anything like the Wendigo. I thanked them for their hospitality and went on my way, convinced they were just trying to scare me. As I made my way back to the ranger station, the sun had already set, and the woods were shrouded in darkness. I heard strange noises coming from the trees, and I could feel a sense of unease creeping up on me. It was as if the forest itself was alive and watching me. And then, out of nowhere, I saw it. The creature was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall and emaciated, with long, bony limbs and piercing red eyes. It stood there watching me before disappearing into the woods. I was terrified. I had never felt so alone and vulnerable in my life. I tried to run, but I quickly realized I was hopelessly lost. The woods seemed to stretch in all directions, and I had no idea which way to go. As the night wore on, the creature continued to haunt me, appearing and disappearing, as if toying with me. I was cold, hungry, and scared out of my mind. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The sun began to rise and the creature was gone. When I finally made it back to the ranger station, I was a mess. I had never been so scared in my life, and I knew I had come dangerously close to becoming the Wendigo's next victim. I tried to tell my colleagues what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was just tired and imagining things. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew I would never forget the terror I experienced in those woods. From that day on, I made sure to listen to the warnings of the locals and always be on the lookout for any signs of danger, because in the deep woods of the park, you never know what might be lurking just beyond the trees. This was my boyfriend's experience, not my own. He grew up in Mesa, Arizona. Really early in the morning, when he was pretty young, he woke up and couldn't fall back asleep. He looked out the window of his bedroom, and there was a man-wolf crouched down on the driveway, facing the window. He described it as a man with a wolf skin or head on top of him. He went back to bed, still couldn't sleep, so he looked again, and the creature was standing right there, with glowing eyes peering into the window. He freaked out, crawled back into bed, and just tried to fall asleep. Could have been a dream. Thanks for listening, cowboys and cowgirls. Hope you enjoyed these stories. Tomorrow, we dive deep into the horror of the American countryside. See you then. Merle. When the weather permits, my dog Roxy and I take a hike on one of the various trails that wind through Rye Mountain Park. The peak of the mountain offers phenomenal views of the Hudson River and surrounding woods. With autumn in full swing, the vibrant oranges, yellows, and reds create a breathtaking scene. Roxy has become quite the hiker at this point in her young life. She keeps ahead of me, carefully moving with each step, her backpack strapped on with her own gear. Roxy and I usually spend the weekend camping out on Rye Mountain if we have the opportunity. Getting away from people, especially during the quarantine, has given me a great excuse to spend my free time camping. Certain areas of the large park can get quite crowded, especially the ones closer to the various swimming lakes. As the colder weather sweeps in, most of the casual campers have packed it in for the season. This time of year happens to be my favorite for camping. It's not too hot, and the nights are just cold enough to stay bundled up in the tent. Roxy and I have spent many nights huddled together, cooking food over an open flame and watching the sea of stars above us. It really is quite peaceful out here. That is, until the hikers find you. I remember the first group I saw. Roxy and I had headed off trail about a mile or so to a more secluded spot near a stream, a flat, open area that was perfect to set up our tent. Roxy played by the water, nipping at the tiny rapids while I set up camp. We were planning on staying until Sunday, then hiking out. I had a few hot dogs, beans, and veggies I was going to cook for the two of us that night. As the sun settled, disappearing beyond the horizon, the quietness set in. Not a soul to be seen. Off the beaten path, isolated, just the way we liked it. I had a carry pistol just in case a black bear or mountain lion decided to investigate our remote camp. There were many nights where Roxy would let out a guttural growl from within the tent, something circling outside in the darkness. In these parts, animals are the least of your concerns. It's the hikers that legend says to be wary of. Dusk came without incident, and I grilled hot dogs, cutting up bits for Roxy to enjoy. It was that right time of night when the sky is just dark enough that the stars start to reveal themselves. Roxy and I marveled as they twinkled above us. We headed into the tent for the rest of the night. I poured water over the fire, put away any leftover food, and zipped ourselves in. Sleep came easy in the tent. I often slept better out in the woods than back home in my own bed. Roxy did too, it seemed. It must have been about 3 a.m. when I first heard it. A large rustling in the woods that woke me up. I tossed in my blankets as the sounds rustled on. I listened closely, hearing Roxy snore deeply. The rustling drew closer, sounding more like footsteps. Was someone out there? I thought. Maybe a park ranger telling me I'm not allowed to camp this far out? I popped my head out from the tent, my eyes adjusting to the darkness as I tried to follow the sound. The rustling came from the side we had originally hiked in from. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, the moonlight illuminating them. "Hello?" I groggily asked. 3 figures, 2 men and 1 woman, were standing still as statues with no hiking gear on. "Hello there," one of them said as they emerged from the darkness. Can I help you?" I replied, fumbling for my utility knife. "Can we use your fire?" one of the men asked in a monotone voice. "Ah, yeah, give me a minute." Roxy was still asleep. I threw on my coat and headed out to meet the strangers. The 3 of them had sat down around the fire pit. I struggled to light it in the cold, but finally managed to get a spark. "So, where are you guys headed to?" I asked. One of the men turned toward me, his face blank and cold. "We're out here for a hike, just like you." But, you guys don't have any gear. It's dangerous to walk around without a light out here, you know." The 3 of them all turned to face me. "We don't need lights where we're going," the woman replied. A chill crept up my spine, unsure if it was from the temperature or the creepy people who had emerged from the woods to find my remote camp. I couldn't put my finger on how they'd found me. All the way out here, I was like a needle in a haystack with the spot I picked. And why didn't they have any gear with them? It looked like they just rolled out of bed and decided to walk 7 miles into the woods in the dark. We sat, the four of us, by the fire for about 20 minutes, all in silence. The fire crackled before us. They seemed to be in a trance. When the awkwardness reached a boiling point, I finally stood up and asked them to leave. I think I'm going to head back to bed. I would appreciate it if you and your friends could leave. The three of them all rose in unison, their shadows dancing around the flames. I poured the rest of my water bottle on the fire, extinguishing it. The pressure seemed to rise as the four of us stood there in the darkness. I nervously clutched my utility knife, praying I wouldn't have to use it. Then the figures turned like soldiers toward the woods and headed off in a seemingly random direction. "Thank you," they all replied. I watched as their dark shapes disappeared into the woods. I didn't get much sleep that night. When morning finally came, I packed up camp and Roxy and I headed home. But that was before I knew the dangers of the mysterious hikers. Before, I had never heard of them. After speaking with people around town and finding old news articles at the library, the sinister feelings started to wash over me. I was not the only person to meet a mysterious group of hikers in the woods. I did find I was one of the only ones to survive. Reports began popping up in my research. Brutalized campsites, campers torn to bits, their belongings ravaged. Locals chalked it up to hungry animals deep in the woods. But autopsy reports showed something different. Marks from strangulation, slices from glass, and knives along their bodies. The worst, human bite marks on the corpses. Something is out there in those woods. Not a lot of people like talking about them. Word of mouth is, if you see any of these mysterious hikers, you should just hunker down in your camp and wait for them to leave. My mind flashes back to the night I first encountered the group. I felt like I was on borrowed time after I spoke with them. Hiking, after all the research I did, lost its glamour. It felt more like I was trespassing on land I wasn't supposed to be on, that I was unwelcome and unsafe in the parks I'd spent so many nights exploring before. So I've taken my hiking to other areas where no one has heard of mysterious night hikers, but something always draws me back to Rye Mountain. Roxy and I will do day trips there if I can get past the initial uneasy feeling in my stomach. Maybe one of these days I'll spend a night there again, see if my old friends come to pay a visit.